Hello, everybody, and we are live here for our second discussion on Friday for the feedback. I started this last Friday for the first time, and it went a little smoother this time, I think, with the setup. Now all of a sudden my dashboard is changing on me. So, again, I'm still not very familiar with this dashboard. So if comments come in and I'm missing anybody, I promise I'm not ignoring you. I'm just kind of winging this and not really sure what it's gonna look like. So um, don't be offended if I'm not mentioning your comments at all. But you may notice I got some lighting this time. A friend named Rebecca helped me figure that out. I went to high school with her, and I don't know I just set it up. So the settings, apparently there's like dimmers where you can make them brighter or less bright, and there's like you can make them more warm or cool. So I don't really know. I just plugged those in. If anybody has any feedback on that, feel free to let me know. But I think it will be better than what we had last week with the windows behind me and nothing in front of me. So I wanted to start off with mentioning the article and two podcasts I have this week. So I just had an article come out last night, so probably most of you have not read it yet. Maybe some of you have seen it in your algorithm, in your feed. But it's called Meet the Transvestigators. And basically, it's this really odd story where, like, we've all seen, especially since Charlie Kirk was murdered a few months ago, we've all seen a lot of people critiquing Erica Kirk, especially like how she, within 5 days of his memorial service, she's on his show and she's kind of like bright and bubbly. And a lot of people have critiqued like the hug with JD Vance and different things like that. Some of the things she said about Charlie in after his death. And so there's been a lot of attention on Erica, and a lot of it is, people from the left, uh, they're concerned about her being, they're not just trying to like pick on her, but like maybe some of them are, but I think a lot of it is people trying to, they're concerned about like her her vision because of what Charlie's vision was harmful toward a lot of people. They're concerned about the Trump administration using Erica Kirk, and so they're analyzing a lot of these different things like about the way she looks or the way she behaves, the way she interacts with people. And but there's actually another set of people who are analyzing her in everything, and that is actually conservatives. And it sounds absolutely wild, but there is a movement of conservatives out there called the transvestigators who are claiming that Erica Kirk is transgender and that she's part of this woke liberal cabal over the globe to try to take over the world. And these are not, again, these are not liberals. These are anti-transgender conservatives who are spreading these conspiracy theories. And if you go down this rabbit hole, like it goes all the way back. I saw it as early as 2017, and so basically what I do in this piece that just came out last night is I go through and give some of the background of what exactly they're saying about her, and then also like what is this transvestigation movement thing? What how extensive is it? How influential is it? And also like then what is this? What do these things say about us as we're analyzing or they're analyzing these different things about her? So it's an interesting piece. It's a bit of an unexpected piece, but I think it's a piece that I think is very important because you know Trump closed out his campaign for 2024, the 2024 presidency, by focusing on the transgender issues and spreading fear about Kamala Harris being for they them and different things like that. So this was Trump's closing pitch was drumming up fear and concern about transgender people. So like it's very relevant, even though it may seem like this kind of out there story. So I highly recommend reading that. Meet the Transvestigators. You can see that on baptistnews.com. You can also find it on my Facebook wall. It'll be there. And then I had two podcasts this week as usual. Monday and Thursday they drop at around 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. That's when they're uploaded, but then like the different platforms may take a little bit of time to get them up. Like I know Apple Podcasts, it's usually up like around 5:45. So but those that's the Highest Power Church and State podcast, and that's also published with Baptist News Global. And so this week, as everybody was talking about, we focused on the Epstein coverage. And the first one that I talked about was the Epstein coverage and how right-wing pundits are minimizing sexual abuse. And then the second one, which was last night, was how our allegiance to political teams leads us to excuse sexual abuse. So I'm sharing audio clips of different politicians and pundits who are talking about this story, but I'm wanting to do it in a way that doesn't just like cover what people are saying, but like it's important for me. Maybe this is naive, but it's in that this is possible. But what else are we going to do? It's important for me to work toward liberation, and so and not just liberation in some generalities, but like let's look at some specific ways that people are under the boot of empire. And so like on Monday, we talked about the language that is being used that minimize abuse. And it's important for us to recognize like literally let's get into the words. What words are being used that minimize what's going on here? And then on Thursday, we talked about how last night we talked about our allegiance to political teams. And I played a clip from Megyn Kelly where she talked about how Marjorie Taylor Greene uh, was going on CNN and how she's going to the enemy's territory, the enemy's team. And it's like seriously, there are people here who have been abused, and we're concerned about teams. And so I think that was actually a very insightful moment because she was being honest that we care more about our teams than we care about people being liberated from the harm and the abuse. And so those were the two podcasts for this week. You can find them wherever you look at podcasts, Highest Power Church and State. So um, I want to get started on the comments from this week, and I'm going to go back to November 14th. I posted this was actually in regards to a podcast from last week. I said last night on Highest Power Church and State, I talked about how the internal battles of our two parties within themselves reveal their values. Then, after I submitted the episode to my producer, I heard what Megyn Kelly said about Epstein pedophiles and 15-year-olds. So, as I was saying, and Patrice responded and said, the podcast was so good. I really appreciate the work that went into it. Thank you. I will listen to more podcasts. May God bless you. So, Patrice, thank you for those words. We are 76 episodes in now, and it's just started in March and been doing two a week. They say you need to be consistent when you're putting these things out, and so that's what we've been doing. You'll see everything from a lot of the stories that have been in the news, like Alligator Alcatraz, or the protests, or the arrests and immigration. Basically, what this in some of the stories that's happened even in the church that aren't necessarily big national political news. Um, but I never know what we're going to cover each week. It just kind of depends. But I'm trying to do so in a way that isn't just reciting what happened, but that analyzes the language that's being used, the dynamics that are being created, so that we can actually begin to loosen the grip that a lot of these patriarchal white supremacist men, for lack of a better term, are holding over us. So um, November 15th, I said, if tariffs are making so much money, why is Trump rolling some of them back? Diane responded, don't ask him, he'll scream at you. And as this week has gone on, he might not just scream at you, he might call you names like piggy, or even worse, he might even call for your hanging. That's kind of where we're at right now. We literally have the President of the United States, Marjorie Taylor Greene earlier, and again, I'm no Marjorie Taylor Greene apologist. She still supports the Trump agenda, and so from a policy perspective, I still find her to be highly problematic. But that said, Trump is upset with her, and she's had to get security detail because of his language about her being a traitor. Well, now it's not just her being called a traitor. Now he's actually called for people to be executed by hanging. That's literally where we're at right now. And I think that that is it's wild. It's completely inappropriate, but it's also the fruit of retributive justice theology and hierarchy theology that has been promoted by white supremacists for, you know, since the founding of the country, and since we were taking land from Native Americans. So, um, let's see here. Gail said, I thought the other countries were paying for them. How about rolling them back? How will rolling them back save us money? Again, none of this makes any sense. Like, there's no logic behind this. It's just, it's people being entitled to see and take what others have for themselves, and so yeah, there's it's just we kind of like it's just rolling with whatever his logic is. He's creating the problems, and then he's trying to supposedly solve the problems that he created. It's ridiculous, but it's the situation that we found ourselves in. I had this conversation that I shared on November 15th, but with my daughter Aubrey. She's 12, and so I thought I'd share this one. She said, "Dad, what does that sign mean? Jesus is coming. Repent." We were going to the grocery store, and there's a sign across the street from the grocery store that always says, "Jesus is coming. Repent." And so she was curious what this means, and so I said some people think Jesus is going to come back in the clouds, and then Christians are going to disappear into thin air to go to heaven, and then Jesus is going to kill and torture everyone else. She said, "Seriously?" I said, "Yep." She said, "So does so and so believe that?" I said, "Yep, they all do." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because they're afraid that if they don't, then Jesus will kill and torture them too." And she said, "So they think Jesus is going to do that to us?" I said, "Yep." She said, "And they're okay with that?" I said, "Yep, it's what they think is true and that they have to believe." She said, "So they're actually afraid that Jesus is going to kill and torture us?" I said, "Yep." She goes, "What the freak? Get out." And it was one of those moments that it's just like, there's a lot that we as parents that grew up in fundamentalism and conservative evangelicalism hold. Uh, there's a lot of like just driving around the city, there's reminders of these threats that we were given at like age 4. I remember at age 4, I was being told about burning in hell for eternity for my bedtime story, and my 2-year-old brother was in the room. So, like, there are reminders of this stuff everywhere. And one of the questions that like I'm not going to traumatize my kids uh in the way that I was. And so like one of the questions that comes up for parents is like um to what degree do you communicate some of that to your children? Aaron asked, "How old is Aubrey for context?" I said she's almost 12. And like there's just I think that it's important to talk to your kids about these. It's kind of like a horror movie, like at what point do you allow your kids to start watching something that's a little bit more scary? Like, uh, I remember when my son, we first introduced him to the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and he was really bothered because there wasn't a clear bad guy and a clear good guy. He was like, "But all these guys seem good and all these guys seem bad." And so it kind of messes with their categories, and then you can get into like horror movies or uh superhero movies or more violent war movies. Like, at what point do you introduce your kids to these things? Do you even need to? Do you pretend like none of those things exist? And I think a lot of that also applies with theology. Like, I'm not going to tell my 7-year-old or my 5-year-old um that, oh yeah, people that that you know think you're going to be set on fire and swimming in brimstone with worms crawling out of your eye sockets for eternity. Like that's just unless you say this prayer and really mean it. Like I'm not going to inform them that there are people that believe that because they're not able to handle that at this point. At the same point, like we're going on Halloween and we've got neighbors passing out tracts to our kids, or we've got Jehovah's Witnesses meeting our kids in the neighborhood, and and then there are others in their life at school who will talk to them, or family members who will talk to them, and it's like at some point they're going to come across, especially in the South, somebody witnessing to them with these scare tactics and these identity crushing messages about who they are. And so I think at some point they need to be aware of what is being said. And I think it's important to bring it up at an early age because um, they're still in touch with their childlike spirit and they're still in touch with um, their innocence and I think it's important for them to recognize from that place how awful and ridiculous some of these messages are. I said in one of the comments, I said there comes a point in any healthy version of being human where you have to realize this is the most absurd thing you've ever heard. Like seriously, a 4-year-old worried about burning for eternity, like for not getting their theology right about the infinite. It's so ridiculous. It makes zero sense of anything. It causes so much trauma, and yet evangelicals think they have to believe this nonsense. Tammy asked, "Are you talking about hell?" I said, "Some combination of the tribulation, the battle of Armageddon, and eternal conscious torment view of hell." Because there are different views of hell that have varying degrees of violence that we can talk about probably some other time. So Graham said, "How do you see the return of Jesus unfolding?" So, like, you know, growing up, I was in this like pre-tribulational mindset that at any moment the rapture's going to happen, we're going to disappear, and those who heard about the evangelical gospel before the rapture happens, but they didn't believe it, like it's impossible for them to get saved, even if they want to. So even like the Left Behind books we thought were liberal because they gave people a second chance after the rapture who had heard the evangelical gospel before it. So I went from that to then I started realizing that like the rapture is not actually in the Bible. Um, there's the evidence is pretty flimsy, and so and a lot of the passages that were being talked about were actually they seem to line up more with um, a second coming of Jesus after a 7-year tribulation, where there'd be a one world government and all this kind of stuff. And so then I started believing in post tribulational rapture, and then um, but there were a lot of warning passages in those, especially in the teaching of Jesus, that seemed kind of scary to me. Um, and then I became when I became a conservative evangelical, more mainstream. I kind of got into this a little bit more agnostic space on that. Even as a conservative, I wasn't so concerned about if it was pre or post or mill, all these terms. You don't need to necessarily know what they all mean. But basically, I was like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I know that Jesus is going to win. That was what was most important to me, and I think that's where a lot of like mainstream conservative evangelicals are today. I think there's still a lot who are very certain about the pre-trib. I think there are a lot who are maybe certain about their you know particular view, but I think most people are like, I think Jesus is coming back, but ultimately, whatever happens in the end, I think Jesus is going to win, and that was kind of comforting. But then as I started deconstructing my theology, one of the questions I had was, well, what does that mean? Jesus is going to win. Like, for one, there's a faith versus fact thing here. Like matters of faith, things about like the afterlife you don't really know. And if you're honest, you may say, "Oh, I got this verse here and I got this verse there," but you don't really know. And if we spent 15, 30 minutes talking about it, uh, you would eventually get to the place, if you're being honest, that you could say, yeah, this is a matter of faith. I don't know for a fact exactly what happens after I die or exactly what happens in the year 2050, um, or whatever regarding the return of Jesus. And so I want to be honest about that. And I have a hard time. I just can't like get all uh, certain and act like it's a fact that certain things are going to happen. And so all of this, to some degree, is I hold with a loose hand. Um, I'm more concerned about like what people are hoping for because your view of the end times is really about like it's about what you're hoping for. You know, if you're praying for Jesus to come and you're excited about that, well, like what are you excited about happening? If you think if justice is retributive and reality is a hierarchy, like we've been talking about, well, then you're excited about justice as punishment. You're excited about your neighbors being punished with violence to their bodies. That's really what you're hoping for. Like you're going to escape to heaven. You're going to have pleasures forevermore. You're going to be singing songs and eating grapes, as I often joke, while your kids, your parent, your sibling, your cousin, your neighbor, your coworker is literally got worms crawling through their skin and they're swimming in brimstone. Like this is if that's what you're hoping for, then that's kind of messed up. And you can couch it in terms of Jesus wins, but is that good news? Is that ending good? Like and not just is it good, but is it good enough? Could it be better? To me, the ultimate good news is a restorative justice where every harm has been healed, where everyone has been held accountable to the things that they've done and the way they've harmed others. And I think that that would take an infinite experience of love that we can't even imagine right now. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know. Um, I think it could. It's a version of good news that is worth thinking about, but also not just thinking about, but working toward. And whether it happens or not, like whether there's a God out there that could bring that about or not, what could I possibly participate in that today? Because there's a connection between your view of what's going to happen and what's in the middle of becoming. And so I want to uh, I want to have this view of apocalypse as union. You know, it's funny how we so often in Christian theology, people have this view of the apocalypse as like destruction, uh, separation, violence, punishment, anger, wrath, all this stuff. But like if you look at Ephesians 1, for example, it talks about an apocalypse of uniting all things. You never hear about an apocalypse of union. You never hear about that. What could that be like? If that's where we're heading, an apocalypse of union and wholeness, of making all things new and not just branding it as that while it's really just a few things new. And even then, it's not even new. I would suggest that nobody's made new if you are cut off from those you love and you have to celebrate their violent punishment. Um, so really, I think it's no things new for evangelical theology. Um, but if we really are heading towards an apocalypse of union and healing and oneness, which really is just the unveiling of what already is. You know, the universe is one, whether we understand that or not. It is becoming, in becoming, whether we understand that or not. It's the unveiling of what is already true. If that's where we're heading, then that's what we can live into and participate in today. So I know that's going to be vague for people who really want to know if I'm pre-trib or post-trib, but that's the honest answer. Um, November 15th, the Department of Homeland Security, I posted a picture of them. They got these cowboys shooting guns, white cowboys. And they say, quote, "We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. And we have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is a loyalty to the American people. Theodore Roosevelt." And the painting is The Rough Riders by Mort Kunstler. That also reminds me. I'll probably I when I'm giving quotes, I'll give people's first names, and I may mispronounce it, and I apologize. Feel free to correct me if I do get your name wrong and you happen to be listening. But I posted that picture and I just said racists. Um, and I try to stay away from like name calling. Sometimes it can just get so frustrating. Maybe I should just said racism. I don't know, but it is. This is absolutely racist. All of this talk, all of their images, they're always white people, and they're talking about one language. It's spreading fear of other cultures. They're using images of us literally killing Native Americans. Um, and it's just so infuriating how they do this. Judy said horrifying. And Elizabeth said, living in the South, I can confirm that many people would nod and agree with this statement. Also, who would nod and agree with this statement also have no problem with flying the Confederate flag. Yeah, I live in South Carolina, and people are always there's Confederate flags all over the place, humongous ones. Like like at a lot of car dealerships where they got the like the road with all of the where each dealership is like trying to one up the other with the biggest American flag. There's like humongous Confederate flags flying alongside the interstate. Um, so it's interesting how they pick and choose when they're gonna play that one flag card. Um, Tiffany said, "Does this mean that Georgia is going to change its flag from the Confederate flag to the Georgia state seal on it to something reasonable now? Because their decades-long battle to honor Confederates is getting annoying." Yeah, it's all over the place. Ryan actually brought some truth here uh, about what the actual quote was about. He said, "As usual, DHS taking things out of context. Teddy was not anti-immigrant. Rather, he opposed hyphenated Americans who espoused divided loyalties, particularly during World War One. Uh, he said the men who do not become Americans. I guess this is a quote from Roosevelt. He said the men who do not become Americans and nothing else are hyphenated Americans, and there ought to be no room for them in this country. The man who calls himself an American citizen and who yet shows by his actions that he is primarily the citizen of a foreign land plays a thoroughly mischievous part in the life of our body politic. He has no place here, and the sooner he returns to the land to which he feels his real heart allegiance, the better it will be for every good American." Um, he said, but that he also advocated for public housing projects, reductions in the hours of labor, Social Security measures, including old age, sickness, and unemployment insurance. He advocated action by the government to advance equality of opportunity, justice, and security for all, graduated income taxes, comprehensive workmen's comp laws, and regulation of child labor. And he advocated for limitations of the political activities of corporations. So it sounds like Roosevelt was a bit of a mixed bag. Um, that's what we're gonna find a lot in of when we're discussing a lot of these people, and even in ourselves. And so yeah, I would completely have take issue with Roosevelt's words, and with the current Department of Homeland Security, who may be presenting a way of viewing reality that would culturally erase people from other countries. They don't need to go back to where they came from. That's racist. Um, on November 15th, I said this is, I posted another quote by J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance said, "A lot of young people are saying housing is way too expensive. Why is that? because we flooded the country with 30 million illegal immigrants who were taking houses that ought by right to go to American citizens. And then Joe Patrice said, honestly, amazing how every illegal immigrant is simultaneously a destitute ward of the state and fully approved for 30-year mortgages and soaking up all the $250,000 housing stock. So I said, this is one example why the Republican position on immigration is simply racist. It makes no sense of reality. Like, yeah, I think it's just ridiculous. Judy said they just bold-faced lie. Is there one of these? If is there one of those freaking Ten Commandments they want to plaster all over the place that they don't break without a qualm? Like conservatives all the time, they talk about progressives as picking and choosing what to believe from the Bible. Um, they pick and choose all the time based on power and entitlement. They don't believe any of the or practice any of the liberation practice passages. They just look at the conquest narratives of Israel conquering their Canaanite neighbors, and then they try to apply that, say the same God back then is the same God today, and the U.S. Constitution is based on the Book of Deuteronomy, and they'll take the household codes of the Greco-Roman culture, and they pick and choose to apply those, but then they won't actually platform and free women like the Bible shows. And if the Bible ever does show women being platformed or allowed to lead, they say, oh well, that was a punishment. Actually, that was God's punishing them for men not leading. They're picking and choosing. It's ridiculous. Um, Jonathan said, I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect Usha's husband to be overly racist. There are a lot of racist people who marry non-white people. Um, or it's the I have a black friend thing. It's all over the place. Just because you married somebody who's not white or have a black friend doesn't mean you're not espousing racist language and power dynamics. Um, Faith said, makes no sense. Immigrants are the convenient scapegoat, and these elites think we are all stupid. Yeah, that's totally true. It's like they're the scapegoat. Transgender people are the scapegoat. They find these scapegoats, these people that are vulnerable, and they drum up a bunch of fear so that people will then take power over those people and elect them to be the ones to enact the power and thus have the power. Kim said, plus they're eating the cats and the dogs. Um, Ashley said, couldn't have anything to do with corporations buying up houses or people buying up a portfolio of houses as a landlord. How many houses does Dave Ramsey own? And yeah, again, like, I don't know the real estate industry. I I know it's nice. Like we recently bought a house a few years ago, and we had to rent for many years, and it's nice to own our own property, to be able to like paint the walls if we want to without getting permission. I told Ruth Ellen the other day, I was like, I just joked, it's like I could go outside and dig a hole if I wanted to. Just go dig a hole, like it's nice to be able to just do that. Not like I go out and dig holes. It's just, to make the point, like it's nice to own a place of your own that you don't have to ask permission for somebody else over you to of what to do with it. But that said, like yeah, um, there are people who are taking advantage of others and creating a system where some people are building a ton of wealth on the backs of others. So in any case, it's not the fault of immigrants who are that we're in the situation we're in right now. It's probably the fault of the people who are in power making the actual decisions. Um, on November 16th, I said, the silence of my conservative white friends is so loud right now. Here's a story about church members running into the woods as agents storm the church property and kidnap someone without asking any questions or showing any identification. They tried to grab others too, as some of the church members fled into the woods. Quote, inside the church, women and children sobbed as they wondered whether their loved ones had been taken. So Daryl said, the cruelty is the point. Jessica said, white conservative Christians, when Starbucks uses a plain red holiday cup We're being persecuted. White conservative Christians, when the Gestapo they voted for storm a church and seize people who are worshiping, meh, whatevs. Mark said, Hail Trump, white power. Randy said, My wife and I visited the USSR in the late 1980s. We participated in underground churches. We met scores of people who had to live like this. In my worst fever dreams, I never thought I would see this in my own nation. Charles said, Christians are being persecuted. It just isn't by who MAGA claims. And then Jessica said, Can you imagine if federal agents showed up during worship to violently raid and terrorize a white church just in case anybody there had an administrative problem with their taxes or an unpaid parking ticket or some equally trivial legal issue? I wrote a story recently that got a lot of shares. I think it was called Dear White Evangelicals, I Was Wrong. It was basically an apology letter because for years I've been told that we've all been told that the government was going to persecute Christians. And we were like, no, it's you're overreacting, you're being paranoid. And then sure enough, the day has come now where the government is persecuting Christians. There are Christians in their church building who are running into the woods. Think about that. They're running into the woods while their wives and kids cry in the building. That's not fiction. That's actually happening an hour and a half away from my house. So it's it's ridiculous. It was projection and it's people. It's like the preemptive war of the 2000s. They preempt. It's preemptive persecution. The government's going to persecute us, so we're going to use the government to persecute other Christians who don't agree with us. Um, let's see here. Me Miguelito said, I'd have to consider whether or not conservative white friends like that are worth keeping. Jennifer said, I cut ties with everyone in my life that at least I know supports this. Yeah, it's kind of a tough time right now for those of us who have family and friends who promote this stuff. It's like it's hard to like just get together and talk about the football game. I went through I was kind of frustrated for a while because I was like, the connections that we had, I felt were trivial. Like there are a few people in my life where it was like every time we got together, all we could talk about was what our sports teams did that week, and I felt like that just felt very trivial to me. And then I went through a phase where it was like, well, we're at least we're at least connecting, and there's nothing trivial about that. So I try to find meaning in that. But now it's like it's back to like we're talking about football while you're excited that people who look like me are being taken based on the way they look. And, and there's no due process. Like that could happen to me just because I live in a red area. We're not necessarily seeing what some of the Democratic areas are seeing yet. So I don't know. Like I could be taken too. Um and it's like so you actually are you do you really care about me? Like you're sitting here promoting uh no due process. Like it doesn't make any sense. Um Rebecca said, I live outside of Charlotte. The city is on pins and needles, tense, worried. All black and Hispanics are worried and in fear. Many are calling out of work, keeping their kids home, etc. A 15-year-old citizen was beat down and arrested by ICE at his Super G job. It's really bad here. I live out in the country and I'm white and have the ability to stay home for several days at a time if need be. But man, it's scary out there. People just have no idea what it's like. White people have no idea what it's like to go to the grocery store and wonder if your kid is going to have their parent taken away from them and given sent to who knows where. Um, On November 16th, I quoted Jesus, "By their fruit." Sorry, I need to get a drink. I quoted Jesus, "By their fruit you will recognize them. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." And then I said, conservative Christians this week, redefining pedophilia to lessen the seriousness of violence against 15-year-old girls and justifying the violent kidnapping of other Christians who are chased into the woods on church property as their wives and kids sob inside. But sure, go ahead and sing "How Great Is Our God" this morning. I posted that on a Sunday morning. Sometimes you may notice I post some things on Sunday morning. Sunday mornings are kind of weird for me. They're nice because I'm not surrounded by people celebrating uh, justice as violence, and they're nice because I can relax and chill. But they also can be triggering because I'm thinking about people singing "How Great Is Our God" and singing about you know highest power and all of these things while they're exercising power over the least of these and harming people. And it 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 bothers me. It it makes me think about how Yahweh may have felt, in the Bible where he's talking about like I don't want to hear your noise. Like that's kind of the feeling I have. Like I don't want to hear your "How Great Is Our God" noise. It's so ridiculous when you're promoting empire over the most vulnerable people in the world. So sometimes on Sunday mornings I post things from that space. Um, Judy said, "These people are so lost. They defame God, they defame Christ, and make instant atheists out of a generation." I had an idea a few years ago for an article where I thought about doing like the top 10 good news. Because people talk about how the gospel is good news. And I'm like, well, there's different shades of good news, you know? And based off of what a lot of people believe is the gospel, I would say atheism is a better news than what a lot of people believe. Um, to become an atheist from your fundamentalist Christian past may actually be a step into a better news. And it's frustrating how people can look at power and violence over their neighbors and celebrate that as gospel and justice. Stephen said, "Sing with me." That's the line in "How Great Is Our God." Sing with me. And then I said, then the worship leader adds, "Unless you're hiding in the woods." Like it sounds so messed up, but I'm not making that up. It's reality. You can sing with the white worship leader if you're not hiding in the woods from the government chasing you while your family is crying inside uh, because of housing prices. You're supposedly driving, and we got to have one language, really. But we're not racist. Um, November 16th, I said, no matter how nice they seem or how much they brand this nonsense with the gospel, every complementarian by man, by definition, fundamentally agrees with this. It was a post by where shared a tweet from Eric Kahn. He said, "One thing the church in America failed to teach women is how to submit. Instead, it enforced and taught feminist rebellion. As these ladies get older, they become more ingrained in not submitting, which essentially makes them unfit for marriage, very hard to reverse later." So, obviously, a lot of people, especially women, had some things to say about this one. Jane said, "These guys act like people do when they're afraid of spiders. They hate anything that looks or sounds like a woman, and they hate the things women do, and they're just scared all the time that women might actually feel free to do these things. So when something vaguely feminine comes near them, they do the social media equivalent of leaping onto a chair and shrieking, screaming at everyone to come see the monster that's minding its own business over there. And then they grab a rolled up newspaper and start beating on it, like for like 5 minutes, with tears of rage streaming down their faces. Then, when spider parts are scattered everywhere and the newspaper is all bent out of shape and torn, they shakily climb to their feet and warble, "Clean that up for me." As they stagger from the kitchen, they squeak, "That was a rational response." And then they go have a lie down. Cat said, "The way they whine when they cannot control another human being." It's so true. Like these guys got their little helpmeets, their little help slab of meat that's how they view women, and the women are their helper to help them fulfill their dreams and their mission. And yes, I can hear everyone saying, "Well, that's not what helper means." Uh, I'm just explaining what how these guys view it. It's just it's so nonsensical. Um, Sharon said it, yes, and the benevolent ones are the more dangerous, in my opinion. At least you can easily identify this wolf. You know what I call a soft complementarian, a liar. That's one thing that I appreciate. Like sometimes I'll post these quotes by like a John Piper, um, that is like it's so over the top. It's like so in your face misogynistic or violent. R.C. Sproul talking about salvation and sexual assault, like it's so awful. But it's like at least they're saying uh, the truth of how they view the world. Because like I'll say something like, "Oh, what they essentially believe is this," and then people will be like, "Oh no, they don't. They don't actually believe that." I'm like, "Well, no. Here's Piper saying exactly that. Like women can't be police officers. Women, if you don't believe your sexual assault is ordained by God, then God is going to reject you." Like that's what Piper actually believes. And so there's part of me that gets angry about that, obviously, but then there's another part of me that's like, well, at least he's being honest. As opposed to these people who we'll talk about a little bit later, who brand themselves as cool and welcoming and kind and affirming of women, but then when you get down to the bones of their relationship and the frameworks they use, it's all misogyny and male entitlement. Um, Christy said, "I know it doesn't sound great to say that I'm entirely sick and done with white conservative men, as many women are right now. I totally get it. I'm totally with you on that." Um, on November 17th, I shared this quote from Jamar Tisby. He said, "One day when we get through this, and we will get through this, we will face a choice. One, hold people accountable for the harm they caused, or two, rush into reconciliation in the name of unity. History shows we usually choose the latter. If we don't break the pattern will break us." And so I said, restorative justice isn't restorative unless it holds everyone accountable. And this is absolutely fundamentally important for me because a lot of people will hear me talk about restorative justice and they'll say, "Oh, you just want people to just be able to do whatever they want and just get away with it." And I'm saying no, like if you've like how could you even have that view of me if you read my wall? Like I'm constantly talking about the harm people are causing and confronting it and wanting people to be held accountable for the way they treat others, the way they don't love their neighbors as themselves. Like restorative justice, and when I talk about an apocalypse of union, I'm not talking about it in the sense of let's all get along and let's have Nazis alongside slaves. I'm saying it in the sense of everyone, restorative justice, for it to be restorative, it has to hold everyone accountable for the harm that they've caused. And I think that what Tisby is saying here is absolutely right. We're probably going to pretend like things never really happened, but people need to be held accountable for the harm they're causing right now. And if that accountability is not going to happen on in this life, then I hope there is a God in the afterlife who will deal with the harm that was caused. I I don't I can't say that with for certain. None of us can of what that of whether that's true or whether or not it will happen. But I think it would be a good news that I would hope for. And if not, I'll do what I can in life today to work toward restorative justice and holding people accountable and healing the wounds that have been caused. Um, this one is may seem a bit more trivial. I said on November 17th, for Denver sports fans, the Broncos, Nuggets, and Avalanche are all undefeated at home this year and are 21 and 0 in the last 21 games. I know a lot of people don't care about my sports takes. Um, I used to, before I deconstructed, I've been a Broncos fan my whole life, and I was like, when Peyton Manning was, before he joined the Broncos, when he was talking about possibly joining the Broncos or the Titans, um, I was like following him. I had the Broncos owner's plane that I was posting where it was on social media, and like I was so into the football stuff, sports back then. I kind of stopped posting about sports because one, I do care less about sports than I used to. But two, people don't really care what I think about sports. And I started noticing that people that I cared about and got along with on themes of liberation were like Raiders fans, and then they would get offended, or Chiefs fans, and they would get offended if I started spreading my conspiracies about refs or something. Um, and then I was like, I don't want to have uh, relational stress on the liberation front because I think the ref got a call wrong in a Broncos Chiefs game. So I kind of stopped posting so much about that stuff. Plus, the Broncos stunk for a decade. Um, but but like, I think it's for me like the fascination with the Broncos is like when I was in second grade, we moved to Denver, and I had a Christian school teacher who physically abused me, and that was the year the Broncos went to the Super Bowl. And so one of the ways, like the one positive memory from that year was the Broncos going to the Super Bowl. I can't think of anything more positive that happened that year. And um and I've kind of held on to that over the years. Like it's it's a time where I can just watch the game and chill and not have my mind on the harm that I'm experiencing. And I think there's something human about that. And I know that a lot of people may not care about like my view of sports or anything, but I think there's a place for that in our lives where we can not just pretend that things aren't happening, but we can like reset our minds for an hour with something relaxing. And that's kind of why I get into sports. I've been into the Denver team since the late 80s. So, um, let's see here. Doug Wilson, we talked about promoting slavery. He said biblical slavery is my most favoriteest subject in the whole wide world. That if you don't believe Americans can be slave owners and walk with God, then you are not an inerrantist and you are posturing. Um, so people had some comments to say about that. Exhibit A, Amy said, of why biblical inerrancy is a dangerous and a harmful doctrine. Um, a number of people said that sounds like a great argument against inerrancy, Rob said. Aaron said, he is correct, though. If you don't think you can own slaves and be Christian, you are not an inerrantist. No one should be an inerrantist. And I agree. Like, this is why inerrancy is so harmful because the Bible was written in a time of empire. It was written in the time of people thinking about their Babylonian Empire or that they were under in exile. Written in the time of Greco-Roman Empire. Like empire is all throughout the Bible. It was the wound that the people in the Bible were processing, and and basically like when you obviously the metaphors are going to be relational categories that empire had: master, slave. In the family, it's the household codes, the husband over the wife, the parents over the children, the master over the slave. Like it's all going to be written in those ways. And so what inerrancy does is they see those things and then they're like, okay, therefore we have master and slave. And then they recreate that dynamic and they say, therefore slavery is good and slaves need to submit even if violence is done to their bodies. This is what Al Mohler said in the 90s on Larry King Live. He said, as much as culture doesn't like it, he said, I don't see how there's any other way than to say slaves have to submit and that they shouldn't have fought for their liberation. And James Cone, he said, I believe that he was the black liberationist theologian. He said, I believe God willed our liberation, not our freedom. I'm sorry, our liberation, not our slavery. And so like when you hold to this inerrancy, you're basically cementing ancient empire categories in the way people relate to one another. And and that's a big problem. You're not recognizing how these power dynamics were being subverted um, by emphasizing a presence in and among those on the underside of power. Speaking of power, on November 18th, I posted a thing. I said CBS News puts out this video about a non denominational church named Rooftop with this really cool pastor who wears his hat backwards and plays movie clips and sips coffee while he preaches. I think we've all seen churches like that. Most of us, a lot of us have been a part of those churches. Church members talk about how casual everything is. CBS even gets Ryan Burge to say people are attracted to this because, quote, we're moving away from authority structure. But if you look at their website, they believe in the authority of an inerrant Bible that supposedly claims men and women have generally been given different roles. These are all quotes I've taken from their site, with men having ultimate theological and spiritual leadership. So their branding makes them sound cool, casual, and moving away from authority structure, but when you dig into their beliefs, it's all an authority driven promotion of the authority of men. Of course, they're all white men. The dishonesty by disconnecting branding and belief drives me up a freaking wall. And then I posted in a comment, anytime a complementarian begins a sentence with men and women generally have been, you can bet that what's about to come out of their mouths is nonsense. Jonathan said, I've noticed that a lot here in South Carolina, name changing and marketing to appear unaffiliated. A lot of Southern Baptist churches do this. Somebody made a comment actually about that. Um, they Annika said, "Ew, it's giving I'm not a regular mom. I'm a cool mom vibes." Jim said, "Why is cool the ultimate goal? When did Jesus teach or model cool, which boils down to approval seeking, does it not? Let's copy the world so that everyone likes us. Can y'all just find a bit of courage and make his purpose your purpose?" These men are so insecure. They talk about how they have to have the power and the authority and the leadership. I think all of that is just, and then when they're trying to appear cool, like it's so insecure. And I would suggest that the reason why they're insecure goes back to the theology that they espouse about perfection and needing perfection to be in relationship with God, or imputed perfection, um, which is basically God looking at Jesus and saying and pretending like that's you. I can accept you because I'm actually looking over here, so I'm really not looking at you. I'm looking over here, and pretending like you're declared perfect. Um, that's going to present some subconscious insecurities in people. So it's not surprising that they would respond the way they do. Nick said, "Never trust anyone who wears a back-to-front baseball cap." Uh, I felt like a number of people were commenting on the hat, the guy wearing the backwards hat. Like, part of me feels like the old guy here, like, complaining about people wearing their hats backwards. I remember that as a kid, or like, I remember when I was a kid, we talked about worldliness in the last week's live show. Like, that was another thing we were told that you couldn't wear your hat backwards because it was worldly. That's what the world did. Um, Liz said, we might not like Bill Gothard, but we teach the same thing. And that is so true. I wrote Bill Gothard was very popular among independent Baptists. And I wrote a piece a few years ago about the Shiny Happy People season one documentary or docuseries that focused on him. And in that, I go through Bill Gothard's teaching and show how it parallels the teaching of mainstream conservative evangelicals today, like the Gospel Coalition, Focus on the Family, Desiring God, places like that. So, um, let's see here. On November 20th, I talked about this training that's going on in Charlotte. Over 600 people came out in Charlotte, North Carolina, to be trained to join the safety patrols who are fanning out across the city each day and make sure not that everyone can get to work and school safely and at home again at night. Jennifer said, "I'm doing the training tonight. Charlotte is really showing up." So yeah, there's a lot of fear in Charlotte, but there's also and that's promoted by white evangelicals promoting these violent retribution policies. But there are also Christians in Charlotte who are coming together to figure out ways to protect their neighbors and make sure kids can get home safely from school, parents can get home from work safely. And I had a few weeks ago, I had an interview with a couple pastors from Chicago on how churches there are doing this. Um, so when asked where can that we get that training from my city, I'm not totally sure, but I would just off the top of my head, you might want to look for the thing about churches is they have I know a lot of people are hesitant to trust churches, but if you can find some that are more justice oriented, they also have the infrastructure that like an individual person in their house doesn't have. So, a cooperative Baptist fellowship church may be helpful. There, some of them are more justice oriented and will be more practical in trying to, deal with some of these things that are happening. Some of them tend to lean more like they're so reacting against Christian nationalism that they want to be non-political, if that makes sense. And so you kind of got to feel that out. Like, are they just going to be non-political and not really be interested in engaging the community? Which to some degree is better than promoting MAGA from the pulpit. But there may be some that are more strategic and would have some training opportunities like this. Or you could look at an Episcopal church may have something like that. That's just off the top of my head. Or they may know nonprofits. Like I went to First Baptist Church here in Greenville um, a few months ago, and they were connecting us with nonprofits that organize things like this. So if even if the church didn't do it, so let's see here. I'm going to close with this one. I think we're getting to about an hour now. On November 20th, I said, when you make a quick, cheap meal, but make it more exciting for your kids, don't call it chicken strips and fries. Call it homemade Zaxby's. I'm a stay-at-home dad for 5 kids, and so the other day I wanted to get some house cleaning done in the evening, and I didn't want to be over the stove for like, an hour. And so I figured what we could do is just throw some chicken strips and fries in the oven. That way, while that's cooking, I can get the dishes going, clean up some. And so, chicken strips and fries, it can be kind of boring. I decided, let's call it homemade Zaxby's. And all of a sudden, the kids were excited, like, we're having Zaxby's. And so, practical parent tip. But also, sometimes I feel like that's exactly what some of these churches are doing with their backwards hats and their coffee and their jeans. Like they're really serving chicken strips and fries, but they're branding it as homemade Zaxby's. And it's like, are you really offering something that healthy? Or are you offering the same power dynamics that the traditional church does? You're just, hiding it with your lighting and your smoke screens, your fog machines, your cool graphics, your movie clip, and you're calling it homemade Zaxby's. So I would encourage people to try to recognize the difference between the branding and the beliefs. At some point I may do a video where I like do a presentation on how to like go through church websites and identify how that works. We'll see. But anyway, I appreciate everybody tuning in. This will be it'll be available for replay. That's usually where most people watch it anyway. So I hope the lighting went better this time than it did last time. I'll probably need to adjust it. I just turned them on. But thanks for showing up and interacting this week. I'll probably take next week off, I'm thinking, because it's Thanksgiving and I'll have 5 kids in the house, and I'd rather not try to do it with them running around me. but maybe in another 2 weeks or so we'll get back to this.